Disclaimer: this story is a fictionalized narrative inspired by real-life emotions and human complexities. It explores themes of infidelity, age-gap relationships, and personal regret. Reader discretion is advised. The intent is not to glamorize or justify betrayal, but to shed light on the emotional struggles that can lead individuals down difficult paths. I was 56 when it all began, not with passion, but with silence. My husband and I had been married for over 3 decades, and somewhere along the way, we had stopped talking. Not arguing. Not disagreeing. Just stopped. We coexisted under one roof like two polite strangers, trading daily updates about bills, groceries, and the weather. Nothing more. The bed we shared felt colder with each passing year, not from lack of warmth, but from the absence of presence. It's funny how loneliness doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you at dinner. It doesn't break windows or slam doors, it simply leaves you hollow. I didn't miss being touched as much as I missed being seen. My husband no longer looked at me like I mattered, and after years of that, I started to believe I didn't. My days were predictable. I woke up, brewed coffee, read the paper, and went to work at a small community center where I taught creative writing to a group of teenagers. It was the one place where I felt I still had something to offer. They looked at me like I mattered, like I still had value. Among them, I wasn't invisible. That's where I met him. He was just another student in the beginning, 19, bright-eyed, eager to write stories about the world as he saw it. His name was Alex. He sat in the back at first, rarely speaking. But when he did, his words carried weight. He noticed things, small details others missed. And over time, I started noticing him. It wasn't attraction, not at first. It was attention. He listened. He asked questions. He remembered things I said. One day, after class, he stayed behind to ask me about a poem I'd read. We talked for nearly an hour. About writing. About life. About loss. And when he said, "You seem like someone who understands things most people don't," something in me shifted. It scared me how deeply that sentence touched a nerve I'd buried years ago. I went home that night to my quiet kitchen and sat in the dark for a long time. My husband was already asleep. Or pretending to be. I looked at him and wondered when he had last asked me a real question. When was the last time he looked at me like I mattered? I told myself it was nothing. A moment. A conversation. But deep down, I knew something had begun to stir. Not because of Alex, but because of what he reminded me I had once been alive. And for the first time in years, I felt the faintest flicker of danger and desire. I can still remember the exact moment I really saw him for the first time, not as a student, but as someone real, alive, and dangerously present in my world. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Class had ended, and the others had filtered out, their voices echoing down the hall. But Alex stayed behind, hovering near the bookshelves, thumbing through a poetry collection I'd assigned. I was gathering my things, distracted, when he said something that made me pause. "You don't seem like you belong here." I turned. "Excuse me? This place. The fluorescent lights, the linoleum floors, the dusty chairs. You seem misplaced. Like someone from a different story." I laughed, a little caught off guard. "Are you always this poetic?" He smiled, that kind of smile only the very young wear without effort. "Only when I think someone will understand." It should have ended there. A harmless compliment from a teenager with a romantic streak. But it didn't feel harmless. It felt seen. It felt dangerous. He was nothing like the men I knew. He didn't carry the weight of years or the weariness of responsibility. There was something unfiltered about him. He spoke without calculation. He looked at me as if age wasn't the first thing he saw, and for a woman over 50, that alone can be intoxicating. Over the next few weeks, these small moments began to multiply. He'd linger after class with questions that weren't about writing at all. He asked what kind of music I liked. What books made me cry. Whether I believed in second chances. He noticed my rings, the old burn scar on my wrist, the way I touched my necklace when I was nervous. No student had ever paid that much attention to me before. One afternoon, during a group workshop, he read a short story aloud. It was about a woman trapped in a house of mirrors, unable to find the door. The rest of the class discussed metaphors and structure. But when I looked at him, I knew what it really was, a message. Later, I asked, that story. Was it about someone you know? He nodded. Someone I'm starting to know. I should have walked away then. I should have shut it down. Reported him. Transferred him to another class. Anything. But I didn't. I let it sit in the space between us, unspoken but undeniable. It wasn't about sex. Not yet. It was about being noticed. About feeling interesting, vibrant, worthy of curiosity. The last straw was a small, meaningless thing. He brought me coffee one morning. My exact order. Thought you could use it, he said casually. And I did. I sat at my desk holding that cup for 10 minutes before taking a sip, because I knew what it meant. The door had opened. Just a crack. But it was open. And I didn't close it. It started small, as these things always do. Little moments that don't seem dangerous until you look back and realize how far you've drifted. He began sending me messages in the evenings, nothing inappropriate, at first. Just quotes from books, music recommendations, short thoughts about life. Once, he sent me a photo of the sunset, no caption. I replied with, beautiful. He answered, so are you. I remember staring at my phone, heat rising to my face. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could have ignored it. Shut it down. But instead, I replied with a half-hearted, don't say that. It was a boundary that sounded like a blush. The truth is, I was enjoying it. The attention. The way he saw me. The way his messages made me feel youthful, wanted, interesting. It was never supposed to go anywhere. I told myself that over and over. He was a boy. I was a married woman. I knew how this looked. But inside, I didn't feel married. I felt forgotten. We started spending time together after class, under the pretense of discussing his writing. Sometimes he'd walk me to my car, both of us pretending we didn't feel the buzz of something dangerous in the air. I'd laugh too hard at his jokes. He'd stand just a little too close. Once, in the hallway, we passed a mirror. He looked at my reflection and said, I like your silver hair. It suits you. No one had ever complimented my age like that. Most people try to disguise it, avoid it, apologize for it. But not him. He acknowledged it, even admired it. And I let that admiration soak into the cracks of my aging self-esteem. One day, I wore lipstick to class, something I hadn't done in years. Not for him, I told myself. For me. But when he noticed and said, that color's dangerous, I felt a thrill I couldn't deny. My husband never noticed lipstick. Or perfume. Or sadness. There were times I'd stare at Alex mid-conversation and feel a jolt of panic. What am I doing? He was young enough to be my son. There were decades between us. Different lives, different references, different futures. But emotionally, we were closer than I was to the man I slept beside every night. The flirtation wasn't physical yet. It was all subtext. Lingering glances. Accidental touches. Shared silences that lasted one beat too long. And inside those moments lived something fragile and forbidden. I kept telling myself it was harmless. That I was in control. That he'd eventually lose interest, or I'd come to my senses. But deep down, I knew. We were playing with fire. And I had already stopped looking for water. It happened on a rainy afternoon, quiet, unplanned, but far from innocent. Classes had been cancelled due to a power outage, and most of the students had already left. I stayed behind to organize some papers, lingering in the quiet of the empty building. I didn't expect Alex to show up. But he did. Soaking wet, grinning like he'd defied a storm just to be there. I figured you'd be here, he said, water dripping from his hair. You always are. I should have told him to leave. I should have stepped back, reminded him and myself of the boundaries we hadn't technically crossed yet. But instead, I handed him a towel from the staff closet and asked him to sit down. We talked, like we always did. Laughed, like we always did. But something was different that day. The air between us was heavy, expectant. The building, dark and nearly empty, felt like a cocoon. No eyes. No rules. No reality pressing in. He stood close as I reached for a book on the shelf behind him, too close. I brushed against him and froze. So did he. And for a moment, the silence was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Then he kissed me. Soft. Hesitant. Like he wasn't sure if I'd kiss him back or slap him. And I didn't move. I didn't stop him. I didn't even breathe. The kiss deepened, and my hands found his shoulders before I realized what I was doing. It wasn't passionate or cinematic, it was desperate. Starved. Like we'd both been holding our breath for weeks and finally exhaled into each other. When we pulled away, I couldn't look at him. "I'm sorry," he whispered. But I cut him off. "No. Don't. Just go." He hesitated, his eyes searching mine, but I didn't give him a reason to stay. He left, quietly, and I collapsed into my chair, heart racing, shame blooming in my chest like poison. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay beside my husband, staring at the ceiling, feeling 1,000 miles away. His breathing was steady, unaware, untouched, unknowing. I wanted to believe it was a one-time mistake. A moment of weakness. But in my heart, I knew something had shifted. A door had not only opened, it had been stepped through. And once that happened, there was no going back. The next day, he didn't come to class. I told myself I was relieved. That it meant he regretted it, that we could pretend it never happened. But when I checked my phone later that night, there was a message. "I'm sorry. But I don't regret it. Not 1 second." I stared at it for a long time. And then, "God help me," I replied. After that first kiss, the line we had crossed became a road narrow, secret, winding, and we walked it willingly. It didn't happen all at once. For a few days, we avoided each other. No texts, no lingering after class. The silence was deafening. I told myself it was over. That we'd both come to our senses. But it wasn't true. When he returned to class, he barely looked at me. But I could feel him watching. Every movement, every word I spoke, it was like we were dancing around something no one else could see. And then, after class one day, he waited by my car. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said. His voice wasn't bold or cocky. It was scared. Honest. "Tell me to leave. If you don't want this, I'll go." I should have said it. I wanted to. But the words never came. Instead, I unlocked the door. He got in. That was the beginning. We met in places where no one would think to look. Rented rooms. Parks after dark. He'd sit across from me and talk for hours about his dreams, his fears, his childhood. And I would listen, fully, completely, like no one had listened to him before. In return, he made me feel something I hadn't felt in decades, adored. With him, I wasn't 56. I was just me. He told me I was beautiful, and I believed him. Not in the way you believe a compliment, but in the way you believe oxygen is real. It gave me life. And every time I went home to my husband, to that quiet house, that quiet man, I felt like I was stepping into a life that no longer belonged to me. The affair wasn't just physical. In fact, the physical part often felt secondary to the emotional entanglement. He told me things he'd never told anyone. I shared my own secrets, things I hadn't said out loud in years. There was something intoxicating about the intimacy, the honesty. Something more addictive than the touch. I started lying. Small lies at first. Working late. Errands. A meeting. Then the bigger ones. Overnight workshops. Weekend retreats. And each lie made the next one easier. But even in the euphoria of it all, there was a quiet dread inside me. A whisper in my head that reminded me, this is temporary. He is 19. He will outgrow you. He will leave. But I didn't stop. Because in those stolen hours, I felt seen. I felt chosen. I felt alive. And I wasn't ready to give that up. Not yet. It was always going to catch up with us. Deep down, I think I knew that. But when the unraveling began, it came faster than I could have imagined. It started with a question from my husband. Where were you Saturday night? My heart dropped. He asked it casually, without suspicion, just curiosity. But my mouth went dry. I muttered something about a staff retreat. He nodded slowly, then went back to his newspaper. But I saw it. A flicker of doubt. A new weight in the silence between us. Then came the phone call. It was from the school's director. Apparently, one of the other students had mentioned how close Alex and I seemed. How often he stayed behind after class. How they'd seen us together in town one evening. "We're not accusing you of anything," the director said. "But you understand the optics, yes?" I lied. Of course I did. I promised to maintain distance. I nodded and smiled and said all the right things. And then I went home and sat in my parked car for nearly an hour, shaking. That night, I told Alex we had to stop seeing each other. He didn't argue. He just looked at me, hurt flickering across his face like a storm cloud. "I knew this would happen," he said. "I knew I wasn't enough to keep you." "That's not it," I whispered. "It's not about you. It's everything else. My job. My family. My entire life." He nodded, slowly. "But what about us? Doesn't that count for something?" I didn't have an answer. The next few days were unbearable. I missed him like a phantom limb, always aching, always present. I kept checking my phone out of habit, only to find silence. And at home, my husband had started watching me more closely. He asked questions he never used to ask. He noticed things, my clothes, my moods, the way I flinched when he touched me. One night, he asked me directly, "Are you seeing someone?" The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I lied. No, but the damage was already done. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. Trust, once broken, rarely returns quietly. Around that same time, I ran into Alex at a bookstore. We hadn't planned it. We stood there, awkward, raw. He asked how I was. I lied again, told him I was fine. "You don't look fine," he said softly. And I wasn't. Everything was coming apart. The fantasy had cracked. The fire that once warmed me was now a threat, dangerous, too close, too consuming. We stood in silence for a long moment before he whispered, "I still love you, you know." I felt it in my chest like a wound. "I know," I said. "That's what makes this so hard." I walked away before I could change my mind. But as I left the bookstore, I realized something with a clarity that terrified me. This wasn't going to end cleanly. Nothing ever does when you go too far. I knew it was over when I started resenting everything, my home, my husband, my job, even Alex. Not because I stopped loving him, but because the weight of it all had become unbearable. Every lie I told became a thread wrapped around my throat, slowly tightening. My marriage was in free fall. My husband grew distant again, but this time it wasn't the quiet of routine, it was the silence of suspicion. He no longer asked where I was going. He just watched me with hollow eyes, as if waiting for confirmation of the truth he already suspected. At work, rumors began to surface. Whispers in the hall. Teachers pausing when I walked by. I overheard someone say, "She's not who I thought she was." I didn't know if it was about me, but it felt like it. Alex and I continued to meet, though less frequently. Our conversations had changed. The air between us, once playful and electric, was now thick with tension. Every moment felt rushed. Stolen. Paranoid. He asked me why I was pulling away. I told him I wasn't. That it was just the pressure. The risk. But he wasn't naive anymore. Not like before. "You don't trust me," he said one night as we sat in my car, parked behind a shuttered gas station. Rain hit the windshield like static. "You don't trust us." "I can't afford to," I whispered. "This could ruin everything." He turned his head and looked at me, not with anger, but with something worse, hurt. "Then why did you let it happen?" "Because I was selfish. Because I was lost. Because I wanted to feel alive." But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said nothing. The next day, he didn't come to class. And the next. And the one after that. I tried calling. Messaging. No response. Then, one evening, I got a short email from him. "I can't do this anymore. Not in pieces. Not when I feel like a secret you're ashamed of. You made me believe I mattered. That we mattered. Maybe we did. But I need more than you're willing to give. Goodbye. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. And then I cried, heaving, ugly sobs that shook through me like waves. He was gone. Just like that. And I had no one to blame but myself. In the days that followed, everything collapsed. My husband found the messages. I don't know how. Maybe I'd grown careless. Maybe he was simply paying attention for the first time in years. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He just asked, why? And I had no answer that would make sense to him. I don't know, I whispered. I just needed something I couldn't find here anymore. He packed a bag that night. Said he needed space. I didn't stop him. I was left in the house we'd built together alone, exposed, grieving a boy I was never supposed to love, and a life I had shattered with my own hands. I kept expecting to feel free. But all I felt was broken. It's been almost a year now. The dust has settled, though it still clings to everything: my name, my reputation, my heart. My husband never came back. We speak occasionally through lawyers and strained emails about the house, the divorce proceedings, the practical wreckage of our life. But the warmth between us, the familiarity that once held us together, it's gone. I can't even say I blame him. I resigned from my teaching job 2 months after everything fell apart. It became impossible to walk those halls without feeling the eyes, the judgment. Some colleagues offered quiet support, but most stayed silent. I didn't fight it. I didn't have the energy to defend myself. In truth, I wasn't proud of what I'd done either. Alex disappeared completely. No social media updates. No messages. No accidental run-ins. It's like he evaporated from my world overnight. And part of me thinks that was his way of surviving me, of severing the cord before it could pull him down too. I don't blame him for that, either. I've gone over it in my head 1,000 times, how it started, where I should have stopped it, why I didn't. The shame still lingers, but it's changed. It's quieter now, less like fire, more like a dull ache that visits in the early mornings. Some days I miss him. Not the fantasy, not the thrill, but him. The way he looked at me like I mattered. The way he asked questions no one else ever thought to ask. The way he made me remember the version of myself that had long been buried beneath marriage, age, and routine. But I also know now that what we had was built in a fragile world of shadows. It was never sustainable. Not with the age gap, not with the secrecy, not with the guilt that haunted me even in our happiest moments. It wasn't fair to him to be loved in hiding. And it wasn't fair to me, either, to love with fear as the foundation. If I could go back, would I undo it? Some days I say yes. Some days I wonder if that brief window of reckless, blinding intimacy saved me from something worse, like fading into a life I no longer felt present in. But I do know this: love doesn't always come at the right time, or in the right form. Sometimes it arrives like a storm, beautiful, wild, and ruinous. And sometimes, the price of feeling something deeply is losing everything that came before it. I'm learning to live with that. I still write. I keep a journal now, not for anyone else, just for me. Some pages are filled with regret. Some with longing. And some with small, surprising moments of peace. I'm rebuilding, slowly. And when I pass a mirror now, I still see the silver in my hair. But I also see the woman who dared to feel again. Flawed. Bruised. But real. And somehow, still standing. 5.